Hey everyone, welcome to another video. Today we're going to talk about issue number 1 and 2 of Jean Grey, written by Louise Simonson. But before we get started with the story, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel if you find anything interesting within the comics covered here, for with your help, this channel can grow and improve. This issue opens up with Jean Grey knocking on Death's door. But see, Death is nothing new to her, for she has been there many times before. And unlike the others who had died during the Hellfire Gala, she knows time is running out for herself. But despite what she believes is going on, she chooses to focus on what is certain, and from her perspective, she is certain that all of this is her fault. That there was something she did wrong to set these events in motion. So with her life slowly fading away, Jean thinks hard and tries to remember. For if she could understand, maybe she could fix everything. But the only problem is, it's hard for her to think, because in her current state, her mind is broken, which leaves her memories scattered. And with each memory being represented by an image, Jean has to be certain to choose correctly. For a different answer could yield a different outcome. So the best way to determine where it all went wrong is to start at the very beginning, because her mutant life was born in death. For her powers first manifested and nearly overwhelmed her when her friend was hit by a car. And as a consequence, she nearly was killed by the surge of power. So as a repercussion, Professor Xavier offered to block Jean's out-of-control psychic abilities, which was just one of her emerging psi powers. Now should she have said no? Later, when Charles offered her a scholarship to his school, should she have accepted it or should she have just stayed away? And even when old Hank arrived from a terrible future asking them to travel through time to save the world, should they have refused or should she have helped? And because they chose to help, they were lost in time, and their presence made things worse, until a young Cable from the future convinced them to return to their own time, to the very moment they left, and told them to forget the future and everything they did. So with that said, even at that moment, she agreed with Cable and wiped everyone's mind. But what if that was the point in time where everything went wrong? What if she made sure we didn't forget? What if we needed that knowledge? Because the old her was certain their future would be abysmal. And it still will, unless they act. So unlike her past self, Jean chose a different path, a different route, and chose to ignore Cable's warning and retained everything they learned. Now this meant they knew who was going to be good and who was going to be bad, alongside how certain events would have played out. So with everything set, there was still one person they had to deal with, and that was Charles, because eventually he would read their minds and the secret would be out. But see, Jean already has planned for that scenario, because she took it upon herself to block their minds for the time being. So with Jean's plan in full effect, she was dead set on controlling what she could in order to make it work. So with that said, the team skipped over to the danger room, and let's just say, the danger room was hardly a challenge after what everyone had been through. In fact, it was cut off almost just as soon as their training session had begun. Because apparently, Magneto was attacking Manhattan. But see, Charles was fully aware that Jean already knew that, because just by looking at her, Charles realized that Jean already removed his blockers. Which he thought was a huge mistake, but a mistake that he was unable to alter because Jean was already at full strength and full control. But somehow, Jean was able to ensure Charles that her having her full range of power would better position them to stand against evil. So with their arrival in Manhattan, Magneto jumps into his speech about how humans should cease their attacks on their superiors or face destruction. Because in this world they have the power, and because they have the power, he was planning on getting revenge for his people, so with his power over metal, he quickly snatched up the members of the X-Men, using the metal suspension cables from the bridge. So with the team wrapped up, Jean quickly unleashed her telekinesis and knocked his helmet clean off his head, and within seconds, the battle was over. But before she delivers the final blow, Jean informs Magneto that what he is doing will hurt all the mutants in the long run. The fear he spreads, his talks of annihilating humanity, will lead to the destruction of them all, because it will make people afraid, which would make them fear and hate the mutants. So with that said, Magneto goes on to call the X-Men the Stooges of Charles. Which this version of Jean had to break the bad news and say not exactly, because Charles would never do what she is about to do. Because during her life, Jean has seen the terrible places that Magneto's mania will take them, and because she knows that she cannot stand by and allow that to happen. So with a devastating psychic attack, Magneto was sent crashing into the ground, and almost immediately Cyclops went to check on their opponent, only to be shocked at what he found. Quickly Cyclops asked Jean what did she do to him. in which she replies by saying she made him a blank slate because they all see where his hatred will lead. And because of that, it would be better this way for everyone. And as for the witnesses and the bystanders, Jean proposes to just change their perception using her powers because Charles does it all the time. So with her power, she controls the spin and shows the people what she wants them to see. Because from her point of view, they were the good guys, so she decided to let them be the good guys in the open, because maybe the secrecy is where they went wrong. So with that said, everything went according to plan and the news was on their side, and the X-Men under Jean's rule were seen as the heroes. So following their success, the team ended up moving out of Charles's mansion and into a condo of their own, using Angel's inheritance. And while there, Jean pursued her own mission, a mission to change the evil mutants' minds through small and subtle tweaks. And the way she was able to do it was by using a Cerebro made by Beast. Now this wasn't just an ordinary Cerebro, no, this was an improved Cerebro, because it was created to locate emerging mutants much more easily, which should mitigate the danger when their power manifests. And to make it better, the device is also portable and more sensitive. It was so sensitive, it could register the first quivers of power emergence, which should give them enough time to step in and keep them safe. And with said device, Jean was single-handedly able to stem the tide of hate and effectively change the world's viewpoint on mutants. So with everything going in their favor, Jean puts the helmet on, and instantly she gets her first hit. Now the hit was of a young kid with extremely strong psi powers. So with the race on, the team quickly set out to help the young mutant in need, but by the time they arrived, it was too late, for the kid's power effectively exploded the building in which he lived. So with the place of flame, the team without hesitation jumped into action and tried to save whoever they could. And while they search, Jean Grey stumbles upon the kid, the source of the blast. And when she gets there, the worst was already upon him, for he was already at death's doorstep. So within his final moments, Jean did all she could to ease his passing all the way up to his final breath. So with the child gone, the news reporters appeared on the scene, and through some more mental manipulation, Jean was able to convince the onlookers that the explosion came from a gas leak, not an emerging mutant. Now this event was the first major event that would lead to the destruction of this X-Men team, because members like Bobby and Beast weren't comfortable with her decision. Because from their perspective, she was dead set on doing things her way, regardless of what the others believed. Now Jean was so far consumed by her own self-appointed mission that she volunteered to rewrite their minds to feel better about the lie she created. So following that event, Trask showed up on the news with proof that undermined Jean's cover story, for he revealed that the explosion wasn't from a gas leak, but rather from an emerging mutant. And because of that smoking gun, Trask called for a task force of Sentinels to be created to bring the mutants under government control, and the so-called X-Men would be the first on his list. So with that said, the Sentinels arrived on the scene, and with extreme prejudice, they destroyed the X-Men's new home in a coordinated attack. So with their base of operations gone, the team had to do whatever they could to save every mutant possible. So in a crazy plan, they decided to gather all the mutants they could think about before Trask and his Sentinels could get to them, even if it meant kidnapping children. Because of their time in the future, they already knew some of the mutants they would need. So with that said, Jean used Cerebro to find them. And find them she did, for Kitty Pryde was first to be taken against her parents' will, by Jean Grey using her psychic ability to make them believe that they wanted to send her to boarding school. And see, Kitty wasn't the only one, because Sam Guthrie and Danny Moonstar were also on her list. So with Jean spinning out of control, Bobby confronts her and tells her that she is acting like mutants are more important than regular people, which was something Bobby couldn't get behind. So with these kids in their control, they couldn't afford to keep them close to them at all times. They needed somewhere to hide them as they collected more. And because of that, they needed Charles's help. So with few options at their disposal, the team returned to the mansion, only to see Charles playing chess with a newly rehabbed Eric. Because after Jean's mental assault on Magneto, Charles was only able to partly recover his cognitive mental state, because she did a number on him the last time they met. So with that out there, Charles goes on to tell her that she is acting a lot like Eric these days in the way she is moving. Now this wasn't something Jean wanted to hear, because she stated that she wasn't a terrorist like him, because she doesn't use her power to kill. Which was a funny thing to say, because even Eric could see that given enough time, she would eventually do so. So with Jean Grey's morality in question, she quickly turned over the kids to Charles, because she knew that he could keep them safe. So with that done, Charles went on to ask the rest of her team if they was okay with her leadership. And in no surprise, Bobby was the first to speak up alongside Angel. So with that said, the two members of the X-Men decided to stay with Charles rather than continue down the same road with Jean. So with the team effectively split, Jean, Cyclops, and Beast proceed to leave to continue her crusade. So following that event, we pick up sometime later with Beast meeting with a reporter by the name of Trish on top of a rooftop in order to convince her not to write a particular story. Because according to Hank, the article she would be writing would lead to fear-mongering, because the kids that went missing were mutants that hadn't manifested their powers yet. And to make things worse, Trask took a good number of the children for himself to build a mutant army, an army that he could control. So as Hank continues to try to persuade her not to write the story, Jean Grey arrives on the scene and uses her power to mind wipe her, because according to Jean, Trish was not writing a single thing. So with Hank's friend turned into a vegetable, he immediately went to her side to do whatever he could to help her. So with his friend out of commission, Hank was completely convinced that she wouldn't do the deed. But with Jean's psychic ability, she disagrees. So with anger building up within Hank, he lashes out by saying Bobby was right, Jean has become a monster. So with that said, Jean snapped and proceeded to attack Hank with a burst of psi energy, knocking him out as well. So with both Trish and Hank out cold, Cyclops emerged from the shadow completely shocked by what he just witnessed. And because of that, Cyclops chooses not to stand beside her, because at this point in the story, whoever Jean is unable to control, she just turns into a vegetable. So with the telepath on her own, Jean is left to wallow in her own thoughts. Because if Jean was completely honest with herself, she was fully aware that she had become a monster. Despite how hard she tried, despite how she tried to restart everything, she still managed to do everything wrong. Because if she wanted to kill a snake, then she would have to cut off its head, she would have to cut off the anti-mutant propagandists, the exploiters, the users, the manipulators, the noisemakers. You have to stop the leaders to make the rest afraid. But the only problem was that she was just one person, she was alone, or at least that was what she thought. Because from deep down inside, she felt it from the beginning, but she ignored it like so many things, but it waited and remained calm, until now, until she called for it. And it answered, for Jean and the Phoenix is one person. So as the fire consumed her, the power she needed was now hers. And systematically, she began her reign and took out each target one by one as she swept through the lands. So with Jean's power being hard to miss, Charles and the rest of the team had to do something about it despite her motives being pure. Because at this point everyone including the highest power in the land is beginning to buy into the anti-mutant agenda. Because at this point, Jean isn't even trying to hide her energy signature. So with no other options before them, the team armored with Cerebro helmets set out to confront the all-powerful Phoenix. So with the fight on, Charles tries to deal with her by psychically talking her down, as the rest of the team attempts to keep her from making a deadly mistake. But unfortunately, no matter what they did, and how hard they tried to stop her, their abilities were still not enough to stop her overwhelming power. Because in a burst of primal rage, the omniversal creature let out a wave of death that consumed all her friends before her, killing everyone she tried to protect. So with only flames around her, Jean stood alone regretting everything she had done, because at this reality everything turned out wrong, so that option no longer existed to her. So with Jean and the Phoenix remaining, she turned her attention to her next option, because at this point, she believes she knows where it all went wrong. So with that said, this issue of Jean Grey comes to an end. But anyway, down in the comment section below, let me know your thoughts about this issue and what predictions you could have moving forward. So with that established, I hope you enjoyed this video, and please don't forget to leave a like and a comment if you want to see more videos like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.